Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sprint 214 review. This is a normal 2-week sprint. Let's get started. I'll start with the overview, Jeffrey on the UI, Adam on providers, Joe on the platform, and Keenan on the API. As you can see, this is a relatively normal sprint with 81 PRs merged this sprint. 200 PRs were open this sprint. That was because we enabled Mend Renovate on our repositories, and Mend went out and opened a PR for every single repository. And we haven't merged those yet. We're going to review them over time to make sure they make sense. And on the closed PR side, we had 35 bug fixes, 20 enhancements, and a sprinkling of tests. And over to the Jeffrey on the UI.
Hey, good morning. In this sprint, as you can see in the slides here, there were 3 bugs, 1 enhancement, and 7 other PRs that got merged into the classic REPL. I can explain about them in the following slides. Earlier, the AutoSC team had created a PR to display proper validation messages, which in turn created a new bug that prevents you from saving the form during the edit action. David had fixed this by rearranging some of the code, and now it ensures that the form only checks for duplicate provider names while adding a new provider and not during the edit. Next slide. Joe had added few methods to include the external management system relation in few modules related to containers in the core repository. And the external management system parameters were added in few of the specs related to the containers in the classic REPL. Next slide. The current implementation for the usages of Google Chrome Beta was configured to be shell specific for Jasmine. Jason had made a change in the Jasmine helper file to make it a portable version for redirection. Next slide. Gilbert made a lot of comments related to Cypress testing, like he updated the Cypress versions, made changes to the way we used on how the titles were presented, made some specific fixes for Firefox, and then made menu-specific Cypress test cases that were fixed and were where few items were missing. And he fixed and added search box-related Cypress test cases. And Gilbert also updated some snapshots to failing test cases for Petrosian branch. And Joe updated the English translations in the ManageIQ PO and POT files. That's all from my end. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So this sprint in core, we fixed an issue where the cloud provisioning quota wasn't counting CPU and memory properly for clouds which were not using flavors, which is, as far as I know, only Power VS, but nonetheless, it was just blanketly returning whatever the flavor.cpu was, even if the flavor was nil. And so if these values are being set based on other methods, this fixes the quota calculation for that. We also moved the guts of the SCM credentials up out of embedded Ansible up into the embedded automation manager so that they can be used by other automation managers. For AutoSCE, they added a method in the backend to allow a way to ask the provider what the list of compliant resources for a certain action are. This allows them to drive dropdowns on the UI with the backend provider providing the set of what's possible, as opposed to having to do that logic on the ManageIQ side, which might not always be possible. For Azure, Joe removed a useless network manager that looked like it was just a copy and paste from the cloud manager. The metrics collector worker never had any metrics capture class or any resources that were queued for it, and so it was just sitting there taking up resources. So that was a nice deletion. For Foreman, we fixed a bug in Deliver to Automate where it was overriding the base method, but the where the base method accepted arguments, the override did not, which was causing a failure. Next slide. For IBM CIC, we fixed an issue after having re-recorded VCRs on the newer version of Fog OpenStack, there's an expires at value in the Keystone response. And if you don't replace that with obviously a longer value, VCRs will start to fail after that expires, that token expires, which is not great. So it's a pretty easy fix to just replace it automatically while recording VCRs and update the cassettes. So we did that for that provider. For IBM Cloud, Jay made a fix for VPC that he noticed where the storage manager name didn't match the description for the storage manager didn't match the cloud and the network manager. So we made that fix, which is great. Thanks to Jay. We renamed placement type, which fixed an issue when you're trying to evaluate quota actually for other providers when using VPC. So if you were, in this example, provisioning on Amazon, but you also had provision requests with VPC, evaluating quota on the Amazon one would fail because it was looking at other open request tasks. And it was assuming that you had an instance type to be able to get the CPU and memory from it. And so that was good bug fix that we got backported. Jay also made an enhancement to Power BI provisioning to use the EMS ref rather than the name in order to find new VMs when cloning on Power BI. This was an issue primarily for service catalog ordering, where the name in the request is not the actual target name because it's appending a suffix to it. And so essentially they were looking at the wrong name and the provision request would time out. But it's universally better to use the EMS ref if it's available. So that's what they switched to. For Power VC, we had a new contributor. Sorry, I'm forgetting their name at the moment, but look at the PR, add a missing log level configuration for Power VC. This was an oversight and it was defaulting to just log.level, but it's nice to be able to tweak it at the per provider level. So it was a great fix and welcome to the contributor team. We also updated the VCRs for Fog OpenStack v1. Power VC is an OpenStack subclass. And so when we bumped the gem for a core OpenStack, we had to re-record for Power VC. Next slide. And for Kubernetes, we removed an auth key from the endpoint validation dependencies. This what this really meant was if you went to change one of the endpoints, for example, a metrics endpoint, you would have to revalidate the core endpoint, but it wasn't obvious based on the way the UI was laid out that you had to do anything. It just looked like the save button wasn't enabled. So it was a quick change to just remove that dependency. The only possible issue is if for some reason your default credential was changed and your metrics endpoint wasn't valid anymore, we wouldn't pick that up, but we're going to be looking at fixing that in a different way going forward. This just fixes the 90% case that was quite confusing for users. For Overt and Rev, we also re-recorded VCRs for the OpenStack gem bump since Overt uses the OVN network manager, which is an OpenStack Neutron compatible API. We also updated to use Rails secrets for the VCR host names, usernames, and passwords. It was previously hard-coded to some old Red Hat systems, which is not great and makes it very difficult to re-record in the future. And finally, for workflows, as mentioned previously, we added SCM credentials for repositories. And so you can now add a Git credential and import workflows from GitHub, for example, by creating a configuration script source for workflows. We are now also invoking the service before and after callbacks, which if you were ordering a service, that's what was previously called by Automate and now by workflows in order to update the service to in progress or finished or finished with error. So that's how the service is getting updated when the script runs. And so we're now calling those callbacks. And we also added the ability to pass a zone or an alternate role to run the workflow on. If you, for example, wanted to use them for an EMS operation, you could pass a different role or you could pass a specific zone. And that is it for providers. Over to Joe.
Thanks, Adam. For platform enhancements, Jason added running the CI GitHub Actions manually in a few repositories. It was previously not enabled. Brandon added a test in pods to ensure the Go versions match what we expect. Brandon also updated the operator documentation indicating which variables are deprecated. Keenan added indexes on containers and container images that they were missing. And following on that, Jason added a spec to ensure foreign key columns exist in an index. So hopefully we would detect this sooner. Dinesh added an option for formatting report dates with relative dates. Keenan enhanced the expression target parse to return a null object to provide a cleaner client interface. I added a Zeitwerk / classic autoloader bridge to enable the active support dependencies interlock for the classic loader, but not for Zeitwerk. I changed some requires to use the namespace paths instead of the manage IQ gems pending with hyphens, as the former is more Zeitwerk friendly. For bug enhancements in Podified, I added a configuration to set the Postgres dynamic shared memory type to sysv instead of POSIX. For Podified, I fixed, or I guess you'd say enhanced Postgres to log to standard error. Jason added tests based on actual runs of the Ansible runner. Next slide, please. For platform bugs, Keenan temporarily locked the IETNN gem to 1.13. Keenan also fixed some N+1 queries in container node. Frank provided fixed translation bugs in a PR. Next, I normalized the event stream filters to match the existing event where clause, so we can hopefully remove the latter. Jason fixed an age bug in test by using relative time. Actually, it was a time issue with specific dates, so he used the relative time to get around the problem of actually telling time, and relative time makes that much easier. Jason also cleaned up some output in test by defaulting the default Git branch. Next, Keenan made some small improvements in testing of performance capture. Jason also fixed the Linux admin's shelling out when it does the SSH agent by being a more shell agnostic. Next slide, onto the API.
Cool. Just one change over here. Urger added the check compliance resource. Oops. Doctor. So that the UI can display the capabilities and properly display it to the end user. On to Jason.
All right, and that's it for the Sprint 214 review. Our next review, Sprint 215, will be on June 28th at the usual place and time. And as always, I'd like to thank all the contributors to this last sprint and all our presenters today. Thanks, everyone.